We also got a retail sales report, Michelle, today that was very disappointing, especially if you look at that core retail sales that factors into GDP. What's going on with the consumer?
So I think it's, as Stephanie mentioned, there was a slowdown in the economy at the end of last year as a result of the restrictions that were put in place to fight COVID. And also at the end of it last year, there was kind of this lull in stimulus, in policy. Congress was negotiating and trying to work out another package, but it wasn't passed until the very end of the year. So the consumer faced a weakening labor market, which was indicative with higher jobless claims and fading fiscal stimulus. And as a result, there was a pullback. But I do agree with Stephanie that it is likely fleeting. And as we look into January and into the rest of 2021, we're facing, I think, a very different environment, one where stimulus has been passed. It is kicking in. We are seeing it clearly in our own internal data that we track. We look at aggregated spending on Bank of America, credit and debit cards, and it jumped higher in the first week of January as those stimulus funds are being distributed. So stimulus is extremely powerful and is important at combating the pain to the economy from the COVID pandemic.
So Russ, despite the great run since November, do you want to be putting money into cyclicals?
I think you do. I think the question is what part of the cyclical segment. I agree with all of what's been said. There's tremendous stimulus. We've got financial conditions about as easy as they've been. The household savings rate, you haven't seen it this high since the 1970s. Debt servicing costs at a low. There is a lot of tailwind behind the economy. We know there are going to be some short-term hiccups, but there are opportunities. The question is, what parts of the cyclical space do you look at? I wouldn't chase those parts that have secular headwinds. Instead, I think whether you look at financials, let's say the regional banks, they'll benefit from some steepening of the yield curve. Even the more cyclical parts of technology, semiconductors, payment companies, parts of industrials, materials where we know there's supply constraints. These are all areas that we think have pricing power and are going to benefit from that acceleration in GDP and, more important, NGDP, which takes inflation into account. We expect to get that later.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.